Between the two world wars, Denmark governed Greenland as a colony. The island was divided into two administrative regions north and south, each managed by a governor sent from Copenhagen. These governors oversaw everything from civil matters to trade monopolies and basic infrastructure. Around 18,000 Inuit people and 400 Danish officials called Greenland home. They depended on a state-run trading company for imports, while exports, especially cryolite, from the Ivittuut mine kept economic connections with Denmark strong. There were no standing military forces, no militia, and no police stationed on the island. Denmark protected its claim through occasional naval patrols, which proved effective when Norway challenged Danish sovereignty. In 1933, the Permanent Court of International Justice ruled in Denmark's favor. When World War II began on September 1, 1939, Denmark declared neutrality after Germany invaded Poland. This neutrality extended to all Danish territories, including Greenland, as Denmark tried to stay out of the European conflict. The policy meant no military alliances, no foreign bases, and no favoring one side over another in trade. Denmark had even signed a non-aggression pact with Germany on May 31, 1939, though this offered little real protection. For Greenland, neutrality meant isolation. The focus turned to local self-sufficiency through hunting and fishing, with strict controls on shipping to comply with international neutrality laws as Atlantic convoy dangers increased. Everything changed on April 9, 1940, when Germany occupied Denmark. The Danish government in Copenhagen, now under German control, tried to continue governing, but communication and supply lines to Greenland were cut. Local officials, like Governor Age Ezetvedt, had to make decisions on their own, still trying to maintain neutrality without any military backing. With no defenses in place, Greenland became vulnerable to potential Axis operations. This prompted the United States to begin diplomatic talks about protecting the island as part of its hemispheric security efforts. Greenland's importance during World War II came down to geography. Sitting between North America and Europe, in the middle of the North Atlantic, it was perfectly positioned for securing supply routes and air corridors that German naval forces threatened. From Greenland, the Allies could establish forward bases to patrol convoy routes against U-boat attacks. The island also became a crucial stopover for ferrying aircraft to Europe, especially before long-range bombers could make the trip directly across the Atlantic. Although ice covers about 80% of Greenland's 2.16 million square kilometers, the ice-free coastal areas offered something valuable: natural harbors in fjords and bays. These became ideal locations for naval and air installations that strengthened hemispheric defense under Monroe Doctrine principles. But Greenland's most important contribution was beneath the ground. At Ivittuut in southern Greenland lay the world's largest deposit of naturally occurring cryolite, a rare fluoride mineral that proved absolutely essential for aluminum production. Cryolite works as a flux in the Hall-Héroult electrolytic process, lowering the melting point of alumina and making it possible to smelt aluminum efficiently on a massive scale. This aluminum went into building over 300,000 Allied aircraft during the war. Before the war, the mine produced about 20,000 tons of cryolite each year. After Denmark fell in 1940, those exports were redirected to North America. This kept Greenland's economy running and became a cornerstone of defense agreements with the United States, preventing the Axis powers from seizing this critical resource. While Greenland had other mineral deposits like lead and graphite, none were significantly used for the war effort. Cryolite alone gave the Allies a crucial material advantage. On April 9, 1940, Germany invaded Denmark. Within hours, Denmark surrendered, and the occupation completely cut off Greenland from the Danish mainland. All administrative ties, supply lines, and communication were severed. Greenland's approximately 17,000 residents found themselves isolated, with no way to receive orders, personnel, or the essential supplies they depended on: food, fuel, and machinery that had previously arrived on annual Danish supply ships. The colony's fragile economy was suddenly on its own. Local Greenlandic leaders acted quickly to prevent collapse. Inspector Eske Brun in North Greenland and Axel Svein in South Greenland took charge. On April 16, 1940, they announced they would take whatever steps were necessary to keep the island economically viable, independent of the occupied Danish government. This emergency self-governance meant rationing existing supplies and searching for new trade routes, though Allied naval blockades of European shipping made accessing vital goods extremely difficult. The occupation raised serious concerns for the Allies. Greenland's location across the North Atlantic shipping lanes made it strategically critical, as did its resources, particularly the cryolite mine at Ivittuut, which was essential for producing the aluminum needed in aircraft manufacturing. Britain moved fast, occupying the nearby Faroe Islands on April 11, 1940, and considered doing the same with Greenland to prevent any Axis takeover. With Denmark powerless under Nazi control, the island was dangerously vulnerable. Although Germany didn't immediately send forces to Greenland, the isolation forced local leaders to look beyond Danish authority for help. This set the stage for new relationships with non-European powers. After Denmark fell on April 9, 1940, Greenland's local administrators, Axel Svein, Sheriff of South Greenland, and Eske Brun, Sheriff of North Greenland, took decisive action. They invoked an emergency clause from a 1925 Danish ordinance that allowed autonomous governance when communication with Copenhagen was cut off. This kept Danish legal and administrative systems running without direct oversight from occupied Denmark. Eske Brun became the de facto leader of a provisional unified government based in Godthåb, known today as Nuuk. Svein left for the United States later in 1940 to arrange essential imports, leaving Brun to handle day-to-day operations. The new local government focused on two priorities: economic self-sufficiency and security. They formed a provisional council to manage resources and declared neutrality to stay out of the European war. Their initiatives included rationing imported goods, flour, coal, and machinery that were critical for the sparse population of about 17,000 Inuit and Danish residents. They encouraged local hunting, fishing, and limited farming to make up for shortages. Cryolite exports from the Ivittuut mine became crucial. The mineral was vital for Allied aluminum production, and the revenue kept the administration funded and helped pay for defenses, even as U-boat threats made shipping dangerous. But challenges were everywhere. Greenland's remoteness and lack of infrastructure created serious problems. With no standing military or police force, settlements were exposed to potential Axis attacks. In response, the Sirius Patrol, initially called the Sledge Patrol, was formed in September 1941 to watch for German activity along the northeastern coasts. As transatlantic convoys struggled, logistics became even more strained. Fuel rationing hurt fishing fleets and left people without adequate heating in sub-zero temperatures. Some communities faced the risk of malnutrition until new supply arrangements with Canada and the United States were worked out. Internal problems arose too. A few European expatriates showed pro-German sympathies, and there were isolated incidents of sabotage. Brun's administration dealt with these through close monitoring and loyalty oaths. The brutal Arctic weather made everything harder. Patrols and communications were complicated by conditions that could isolate outposts for months, making it difficult to maintain administrative coordination across the enormous territory. After Germany occupied Denmark on April 9, 1940, cutting off all communications and supply lines to Greenland, Danish Minister to the United States Henrik Kauffmann made a bold decision. He refused to follow orders from the puppet government in Copenhagen and instead focused on protecting Greenland from potential Axis threats. Acting on his own as a representative of a free Denmark, Kauffmann worked with local Greenland authorities, including Provisional Governor Ivittuut, to secure protection from the United States. His motivation was clear: Greenland's strategic location and resource, This is especially the Ivittuut cryolite mine, which was vital for Allied aluminum production, had to be safeguarded. This effort led to the Kauffmann Declaration, where he publicly affirmed that Greenland was separate from occupied Danish control, opening the door for formal defense arrangements. On April 9, 1941, exactly 1 year after the Danish invasion, Kauffmann signed the agreement relating to the defense of Greenland with U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull in Washington, D.C. He signed it explicitly in the name of Denmark, but without any authorization from Copenhagen. The treaty gave the United States the right to build, maintain, and operate defense facilities throughout Greenland, including airfields, weather stations, and naval bases. It also affirmed Danish sovereignty and committed the U.S. to defend the island from attack and ensure essential supplies reached its people. Key terms included use access to necessary lands and waters, exemption of American forces from Danish jurisdiction for security matters, and mutual consultations on defense issues. Effectively, this integrated Greenland into hemispheric defense without giving up any territory. The agreement was ratified by Greenland's local councils, but had no provisions for ending it except by mutual consent. The Copenhagen government immediately condemned the treaty as invalid, fired Kauffmann as ambassador, and called his actions treasonous, though they couldn't enforce any of this due to the German occupation. In Greenland, however, the Riksdag and local officials supported the agreement, seeing use as protection as essential for survival amid blockade-induced shortages. Kauffmann defended his decision, arguing he was protecting Danish interests against Nazi influence. The US moved forward with implementation, deploying troops and establishing bases like WW2 by mid-1941. This enabled Allied operations without any real Danish resistance until after the war. The pact marked Greenland's de facto entry into the Allied sphere and highlighted Kauffmann's defiance as a crucial act of pragmatic diplomacy during total war. The United States established the WW2 network of military bases in Greenland under the defense agreement signed on April 9, 1941, by U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull and Danish Ambassador Henrik Kauffmann. This agreement authorized American forces to protect the Danish territory during the Nazi occupation of Denmark at the request of Greenland's local governing council. Based on the 1940 Act of Havana provisions for hemispheric defense, the pact enabled construction of airfields, radio stations, and support facilities to counter German influence, secure cryolite exports from Ivittuut, and support transatlantic air routes for Lend-Lease deliveries to the United Kingdom. Construction of the first base, WW2 at Narsarsuaq in southwestern Greenland, began on July 7, 1941, following a survey expedition and the arrival of a convoy from Brooklyn on June 19, 1941. Effort was led by the 3rd Battalion, 21st Engineer Aviation Regiment, with 254 personnel, supported by medical, quartermaster, signal, ordnance, and artillery units totaling around 500 men, later expanded to 665 with an additional engineering company. By September 1941, the site included a 5,000-foot runway surfaced with pierced steel planking, 85 wooden buildings, and essential infrastructure like fuel storage and weather stations. It became fully operational by January 1942 for ferrying bombers and fighters across the North Atlantic, providing meteorological reports critical to Allied convoy routing and supporting coastal defense. The U.S. Coast Guard's Greenland Patrol, activated on May 6, 1941, under Navy operational control, provided logistical support. This included transport via cutters like the USCGC Algonquin and ice reconnaissance to help with base access during the short Arctic summer construction season. Additional installations followed in 1941. WW 8 at Sanderström Fjord was established on October 20th, extending the network along Greenland's west coast for radar and emergency landing capabilities. East Coast sites like WW East 2 at Ivittuut were started later in 1941 to monitor potential German incursions from that direction, though full operations often didn't begin until 1942 due to harsh terrain and weather. By war's end, the Bluey network included approximately 14 bases, 9 on the west coast, Bluey West 1 through 9, and 5 on the east, Bluey East 1 through 5. These bases served as hubs for over 8,000 aircraft transits and enabled Allied dominance in Arctic weather intelligence, which proved decisive in naval operations by denying Germany comparable data advantages. These facilities highlighted Greenland's pivotal role in connecting the North American and European theaters. Initial deployments emphasized rapid engineer-led construction over permanent fortifications to minimize local disruption while maximizing strategic projection. Greenland's strategic location made it a critical hub for meteorological observations that influenced North Atlantic and European weather patterns. Weather systems often originated there before moving eastward, making accurate forecasts from the island essential for Allied convoy routing, air operations, and major offensives, including the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. The data from Greenland was superior to what could be obtained from more southern stations. Control over Greenland's weather intelligence became a high-stakes contest. Disruptions could seriously impair naval and aerial planning amid the harsh Arctic conditions. Before the war, Denmark maintained stations at Minkbukta and Torgilsbu in northeast Greenland, which were integrated into Allied networks after the 1941 Defense Agreement. The United States expanded these with observations from Bluey West bases, including Bluey West 1 at Narsarsuaq and Bluey West 8 at Sandra-Strömfjord. Army Air Forces personnel at these locations conducted regular upper-air soundings and surface reports, transmitting them to North American and European centers. A U.S. radio surveillance post called Atlantic City intercepted German transmissions to pinpoint enemy sites, strengthening Allied dominance in the region. Germany tried to counter this advantage by establishing 4 manned weather stations along Greenland's northeast coast between 1942 and 1944. Teams deployed by submarine or trawler-transmitted data to support U-boat patrols and Luftwaffe missions over Norway. Operations included Holzhauge on an island in 1942 and Edelweiss II, which was captured intact on October 4, 1944, by U.S. Army troops after being detected by the Northeast Greenland Sledge Patrol. That raid yielded 12 prisoners and valuable equipment. The final station fell to the USCGC Eastwind in October 1944, along with the capture of its supply vessel, Extenstein, effectively ending German meteorological incursions by late 1944. Allied countermeasures, including dog sled patrols by Danish and Inuit personnel under U.S. oversight, systematically located and neutralized German outposts. This prevented sustained data flows to Berlin and preserved the Allies' forecasting advantage. These efforts highlighted the direct connection between territorial control in remote areas and operational success in broader theaters. The Ivittuut cryolite mine held the world's largest natural deposit of the mineral essential for aluminum production in aircraft manufacturing. After Germany invaded Denmark on April 9, 1940, isolating Greenland from metropolitan control, the mine became a strategic Allied asset. The United States recognized its irreplaceable importance. At its peak in 1942, the mine produced 86,000 tons, shipped primarily to North American smelters, and initiated protective measures to prevent German seizure or disruption. Initial defenses were mounted by the U.S. Coast Guard. On May 15, 1940, they delivered a 3-inch gun and machine guns to arm the site amid fears of an Axis incursion. By September 1940, coastal artillery emplacements were installed to deter U-boat attacks, with Coast Guard cutters conducting patrols in the Arsuk Fjord approaches. These early efforts transitioned to formal U.S. military oversight after the April 9, 1941, defense agreement with local Danish authorities. This enabled the establishment of Bluey West 7 Airfield, 3 miles east of Ivittuut, for aerial surveillance and rapid response. In 1942, the U.S. Army relieved Coast Guard guards with an artillery unit, deploying approximately 500 soldiers to secure the mine and its 100 to 200 Danish and local workers against potential Nazi commando raids or submarine-launched sabotage. Supporting naval bases in Ivittuut and across the fjord enhanced maritime interdiction, while combat air patrols from Bluey West 1 headquarters enforced no-fly zones over the facility. German threats came primarily through U-boat interdiction. This was exemplified by the sinking of the transport SS Dorchester on February 3, 1943, while en route to Ivittuut with replacement troops. The attack resulted in 675 fatalities, including the famous 4 chaplains. However, no direct assaults on the mine succeeded. Allied vigilance strengthened by intelligence that denied German weather data from nearby stations ensured uninterrupted operations. The mine supplied over 90% of wartime cryolite needs without compromise. The United States Coast Guard launched the Greenland Patrol in June 1941, initially as the Northeast Greenland Patrol under Commander Edward Iceberg Smith. Its mission was to protect Greenland's coasts from German incursions, support the construction of U.S. military bases, and conduct anti-submarine warfare operations against the threat of U-boat attacks on North Atlantic shipping routes. By October 1941, this merged with the South Greenland Patrol into a unified command, expanding coverage to protect vital assets like the cryolite mine at Ivittuut, and deny German forces the meteorological intelligence that could aid U-boat wolf pack tactics. Coast Guard cutters equipped with sonar, depth charges, and Y-guns patrolled ice-choked waters, performed ice reconnaissance to guide convoys, and escorted supply shipments to bases like Bluey West 1, navigating U-boat-infested areas where German submarines posed serious risks to Allied logistics. Key surface operations included direct confrontations with German auxiliary vessels supporting covert activities. On September 12, 1941, the cutter Northland intercepted and seized the Norwegian trawler Busko off Mygbukta, which was resupplying a German weather station. This resulted in the capture of German radiomen, the first enemy personnel detained by U.S. forces in World War II, marking the initial American naval prize of the conflict. In September 1944, Northland pursued the armed Nazi trawler Kettingen off Great Koldewey Island through heavy ice. An escorting U-boat fired torpedoes that detonated harmlessly on ice floes, leading to the surrender of the trawler's 28 crew members. Similarly, in October 1944, the cutter Eastwind captured the German freighter Externstein, also known as Dundalk, preventing its use for blockade running or support of Axis operations in the region. These actions, involving nearly 50 cutters over the war including Modoc, Comanche, Storis, and Southwind, disrupted German efforts while providing search and rescue support, such as aiding survivors from the torpedoed troopship Dorchester in February 1943. Complementing surface patrols, the Coast Guard established Patrol Squadron VP6CG in August 1943 at Argentia, Newfoundland. The squadron deployed up to 12 PBY-5, a Catalina flying boats from bases like Bluey West 1 in Greenland for anti-submarine sweeps, convoy aerial coverage, and ice patrols across Greenland, Labrador, and the Canadian Arctic. These aircraft conducted long-range reconnaissance in extreme conditions, including 120-knot winds and unheated cockpits. Detachments were sent to Reykjavik, Iceland, from July to November 1944 to bolster cutter operations against German weather stations and potential U-boat threats. While no confirmed U-boat sinkings occurred directly in Greenland waters, under these patrols reflecting the deterrence effect on German submarine operations, rather than frequent direct engagements, the combined efforts secured sea lanes, relayed critical weather and ice data to Allied command, and minimized disruptions to transatlantic convoys vital for the European theater. Nazi Germany established clandestine weather stations in Greenland to secure meteorological intelligence for North Atlantic operations, particularly to support U-boat wolf packs and Luftwaffe bombing campaigns. Accurate weather forecasting was vital for routing convoys and evading Allied detection. These stations transmitted encrypted data via radio, with personnel enduring harsh Arctic conditions in remote northeastern locations to avoid detection. Germany attempted to insert teams during summer vessel rotations starting in 1940, achieving operational status for several stations by November 1941, after Luftwaffe supply airlifts delivered nearly 4 tons of equipment. In total, 4 such stations were set up, though Germany made at least 8 efforts to establish permanent outposts, all ultimately unsuccessful due to Allied countermeasures. The stations represented a key German counter-effort against Allied dominance in Greenland, providing data that could reveal transatlantic convoy vulnerabilities. However, they also prompted sabotage and neutralization operations by Allied forces. The Danish Greenlandic Northeast Greenland Sledge Patrol, known as Sikkerhedsstyrken or Sirius Patrol, patrolled vast uninhabited areas using dog sleds. They detected at least 2 secret stations between 1942 and 1944 through tracks, radio signals, and supply caches. Upon discovery, patrols harassed sites with small arms fire to disrupt operations without direct assault, alerting U.S. forces for follow-up raids while avoiding escalation that could draw German naval retaliation. U.S. Coast Guard cutters conducted direct sabotage and capture missions, often coordinating with patrol intelligence, targeting stations, and their supply trawlers to dismantle the network. In September 1944, the U.S. CGC Eastwind raided and captured the trawler Externstein off Greenland's coast while it was resupplying a station, seizing meteorological equipment and charts. Later that month, Eastwind's landing party assaulted the associated weather outpost before dawn, capturing 12 German personnel without casualties and destroying radio gear to prevent further transmissions. The final station, Edelweiss II, fell to American soldiers on October 4, 1944, in northeastern Greenland, marking the end of organized German weather activities on the island by October 1944. These operations neutralized the threat without significant losses, though German teams had inflicted minor sabotage, such as burning abandoned equipment during retreats. After Germany occupied Denmark on April 9, 1940, Greenland's traditional trade connections with Europe were cut off, triggering an economic crisis. Imports of essential goods stopped and export markets collapsed. The Provisional Administration, led by Eske Brun, responded by sending a trade commission to the United States in July 1940 to negotiate purchases of supplies and sales of Greenlandic products, establishing new commercial ties with North America. These arrangements, strengthened by the 1941 Defense Agreement with the United States, enabled the resumption of imports like food, fuel, and machinery, while opening up exports to the U.S., Canada, and Portugal. The cryolite mine at Ivittuut became the foundation of this economic revival, providing a vital mineral for Allied aluminum production essential to aircraft manufacturing. Operated under Danish management, the mine reached peak output of 86,000 tons in 1942, with shipments directed primarily to the Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company in Philadelphia for refining. Cryolite exports to North America not only generated substantial revenue, but also helped create a favorable trade balance that offset wartime disruptions. The mine sustained the local economy through employment for approximately 100 to 200 miners and related jobs filled by Greenlanders. Along with mining revenues, traditional exports like salted fish and animal oils experienced a boom due to elevated wartime prices and redirected markets to Allied nations. Fisheries, a cornerstone of Greenland's economy, shifted shipments mainly to the U.S. and Canada, boosting overall export earnings and enabling the import of necessities previously sourced from Denmark. This shift from European dependency to transatlantic trade partnerships marked a period of economic revival. Cryolite proceeds and diversified exports covered budgetary deficits and fostered self-sufficiency amid isolation. The Danish population in Greenland, numbering fewer than 500 individuals before the war, primarily consisted of administrators, traders, and officials. They gained greater local autonomy after Denmark's occupation by Germany on April 9, 1940. Under Governor Eske Brun, Danish officials centralized administration in Nuuk, then called Godthbe, making up for disrupted personnel supplies from Denmark and encouraging increased individual responsibility and democratic practices among both Danes and locals. This isolation from metropolitan Denmark, while challenging supply chains, maintained loyalty to the Danish crown and enabled effective governance without direct wartime disruptions to Danish settlers. Routines. The Inuit population, comprising approximately 18,000 to 20,000 residents and forming the vast majority of Greenland's inhabitants, experienced minimal direct interference from military operations. These were concentrated in remote areas and focused on strategic assets rather than settlements. Daily life for Inuit hunters and trappers continued largely unchanged, with traditional activities unaffected by combat. However, some East Greenland Inuit participated in the sledge patrol, alongside Danes and Norwegians, to monitor and sabotage German weather stations. This involved reconnaissance and occasional risks, such as the 1943 confrontation at the Holzau station, where one Dane was killed. The arrival of up to 6,000 U.S. personnel, particularly at bases like Narsarsuaq, established in summer 1941, introduced limited social interactions. Colonial authorities enforced a fraternization ban to protect local Inuit society from potential disruptions, despite expressed desires among Greenlanders for contact. U.S. humanitarian aid and provisions during the war generated lasting goodwill among both Inuit and Danish residents, offsetting isolation effects and exposing locals to external technologies like kerosene, lamps replacing seal oil, and early electrification in some areas. This period heightened awareness of global affairs through expanded media like the Greenlandsposten newspaper and radio, stimulating discussions on education, science, and modernization while promoting a sense of national solidarity. No significant demographic shifts occurred, with the total population remaining stable around 20,000 to 21,000 through 1945, reflecting how peripheral wartime activities were to civilian life. After Denmark's liberation from German occupation on May 5, 1945, administrative authority over Greenland returned to the Danish government in Copenhagen, ending the provisional autonomy established under wartime governors Eske Brun and Axel Svein. The local administration, which had operated under a 1925 law allowing governors to assume emergency powers amid disrupted communications with occupied Denmark, reverted to pre-war oversight structures. Supply lines and directives resumed from the mainland. The Danish parliament promptly ratified the April 9, 1941, defense agreement with the United States, which had enabled American military facilities and protection during the war. This formalized U.S. access to bases while upholding Danish sovereignty and waiving wartime compensation claims under Article 5. An initial aim was to restore pre-war colonial governance, but wartime economic expansions in trade, hunting, and infrastructure bolstered by U.S. aid prompted discussions on modernization, including renewed focus on Danification policies for education, health, and urbanization. In 1948, Denmark established the Greenland Commission, comprising Danish officials and Greenlandic representatives, to assess post-war reforms. Its 1950 G50 report recommended enhanced local input and development, leading to the Greenland Acts that unified legislative bodies and improved social services. These efforts culminated in the 1953 Danish constitutional revision, effective June 5, which integrated Greenland as an equal county within the realm, abolishing its formal colonial status and granting 2 seats in the Folketing Parliament after local approval. This transition preserved Danish administrative primacy, but incorporated wartime gains, such as expanded airfields and cryolite exports, into a framework balancing local needs with metropolitan control. After World War II, the United States maintained a strategic interest in Greenland due to its geographic position in the Arctic, which provided vantage points for monitoring Soviet bomber and missile threats across the polar region, as well as for anti-submarine warfare and transatlantic reinforcements. Did you know this story? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for your attention, and if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel for more discoveries.